Hi guys, this is Allison from Alley Cat Creations. How are you? Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you have yet to do so. And if you get anything from my work, I connect Dawn Epiphany and Mind Explosion, a new book to read, a new author to explore. Please consider supporting my work. All the links are at the bottom of this video. So underneath the video, you scroll through, and I give you lots of ways to help me out. Allylatkreations211.com, which I do still have to update if I'm not trying to get killed this week, will be up there. You'll find paint and sip paintings, pyramids, drawings, candles, all kinds of fun stuff. Go check out my portfolio. And if you're interested in any of it, please email me. 3D memberships is a really great way to help out this channel. Keep it going because bills are in and they're incoming. Uh, it's a really great way to show your love and also keep me going. You get channel member only readings, oracle cards once a week. I do an hour plus long with a whole long plethora of cards in different decks so that you're hearing a major theme, or you at least will hear something that triggers your healing process and moving forward. I also do raffles when I can afford to do them, and you guys get free entries into those raffles. Incoming October, I will be doing a 4D tier on my channel, and that might involve more channel member only content and some other fun things that I am working on. So go check those out. And today I'm going to be doing Blavatsky. We're going to continue stanza 12 because it doesn't ever seem to want to end. And I don't like to lose people with hour-long insanity from Blavatsky. So we're going to leave off, pick up where we left off. Let their destiny be accomplished. We are the servants of the great four. May the kings of light return. The great king fell upon his dazzling face and wept. When the king assembled, the waters had already moved. But the nations had now crossed the dry lands. They were beyond the water mark. Their kings reached them in their Vwans, however you pronounce that, and led them on to the lands of fire and metal, north and east and north. Still in another passage it is said, stars, meteors showered on the lands of the black faces, but they slept. The speaking beasts, the magic watchers, kept quiet. Neither lords waited for orders, but they came not, for their master slept. The waters arose and covered the valleys from one end of the earth to another. High lands remained, the bottom of the earth, the lands of the anthropods, remained dry. There dwelt those who escaped, the men of the yellow faces and of the straight eye, the frank and sincere people. When the lords of the dark faces awoke and bethought themselves of their Vaiwans, in order to escape from the rising waters, they found them gone. Then a passage shows some of the more powerful magicians of the dark face who awoke earlier than the others, pursuing those who had spoilt them and who were in the rear guarded. For the nations that were led away were as thick as the stars of the Milky Way. Says a more modern commentary written in Sanskrit only. Like as a dragon snake uncoils slowly its body, so the sons of men, led on by the sons of wisdom, open their folds, spreading out, expanding like a running stream of sweet waters. Many of the faint-hearted among them perished on their way, but most were saved. Yet the pursuers, whose heads and chests soared high above the water, chased them for 3 lunar terms, until finally reached by the rising waves, they perished to the last man, the soil sinking under their feet and the earth engulfing those who had desecrated her. This sounds a good deal like the original material upon which the similar story in Exodus was built many hundreds of thousands of years later. The biography of Moses, the story of his birth, childhood, and rescue from the Nile by Pharaoh's daughter, is now shown to have been adapted from the Chaldean narrative about Sargon. And if so, the Assyrian title in the British Museum being a good proof of it, why not that of the Jews robbing the Egyptians of their jewels, the death of Pharaoh and his army, and so on? The gigantic, 2 seconds. The gigantic magicians of Ruda and Daida, the lords of the dark face, may have become, in the later narrative, the Egyptian Magi and the yellow-faced nations of the fifth race, the virtuous sons of Jacob, the chosen people. One more statement has to be made. There have been several divine dynasties, a series for every race, beginning with the third, each series according and adapted to its humanity. The last 7 dynasties referred to in the Egyptian and Chaldean records belong to the fifth race, which, though generally called Aryan, was not entirely so, as it was ever largely mixed up with the races to which ethnology gives other names. It would be impossible, in view of the limited space at our disposal, to go any further into the description of the Atlanteans, in whom the whole East believes as much as we believe in the ancient Egyptians, but whose existence the majority of the Western scientists deny, as they have denied before this many a truth, from the existence of Homer down to that of the carrier pigeon. The civilization of the Atlanteans was greater even than that of the Egyptians. It is their degenerate descendants, the nation of Plato's Atlantis, which built the first pyramids in the country, and that certainly before the advent of the Eastern Ethiopians, as Herodotus called the Egyptians. This may be well inferred from the statement made by Animus Marcellinus, who says of the pyramids that there are also subterranean passages and winding retreats, which it is said man skillful in the ancient mysteries, by means of which they divined the coming of a flood, constructed in different places, lest the memory of their sacred ceremonies should be lost. These men who divined the coming of floods were not Egyptians, who never had any except the periodical rising of the Nile. Who were they? The last remnants of the Atlanteans, we maintain. Those races which are dimly suspected by science, and thinking of Mr. Gold, the well-known geologist, says, can we suppose that we have all exhausted the great museum of nature? Have we in fact penetrated yet beyond its antechambers? Does the written history of man, comprising a few thousand years, embrace the whole course of his intelligent existence? Or have we, in long mythical eras, extending over hundreds of thousands of years, and recorded in the chronologies of Chaldea and of China, shadowy mementos of prehistoric man handed down by tradition and perhaps transported by a few survivors to existing lands from others, which, like the fabled Atlantis of Plato, may have been submerged, or the scene of some great catastrophe which destroyed them with all their civilization. After this, one can turn with more confidence to the words of a master who wrote several years before these words were penned by Mr. Gold. The fourth race had its periods of the highest civilization. Greek and Roman and even Egyptian civilizations are nothing compared to the civilizations that began with the third race after its separation. But if this civilization and the mastery of the arts and sciences are denied to the third and fourth races, no one will deny that between the great civilization of antiquity, such as those of Egypt and India, there stretched the dark ages of crass ignorance and barbarism, even since the beginning of the Christian era up to our modern civilization, during which the period of all recollection of these traditions were lost. As said in Isis Unveiled, why should we forget that ages before the prow of the adventurous Genoese clove the western waters, the Phoenician vessels had circumnavigated the globe. The spread civilization in regions now silent and deserted. What archaeologist will dare assert that the same hand which planned the pyramids of Egypt, Karnak, and the thousand ruins now crumbling to oblivion on the sandy banks of the Nile did not erect the monumental Nakhon Wat of Cambodia, or trace the hieroglyphics on the obelisks and doors of the deserted Indian village newly discovered in British Columbia by Lord Dufferin, or those of the ruins of Pelnik and Uxmal of Central America. Do not the relics we treasure in our museums, last mementos of the long-lost arts, speak loudly in favor of ancient civilization? And do they not prove over and over again that nations and continents that have passed away have buried along with them arts and sciences which neither the first crucible ever heated in a medieval cloister, nor the last cracked by a modern chemist have revived, nor will, at least in the present century? And the same question may be put now that was put then. It may be once more asked, how does it happen that the most advanced standpoint that has been reached in our times only enables us to see in the dim distance up the alpine path of knowledge the monumental proofs that earlier explorers have left to mark the plateau that had reached and occupied? If modern masters are so much in advance of the old ones, why do they not restore to us the lost arts of our post-Diluvian forefathers? Why do they not give us the unfading colors of Luxor, the Tyrian purple, the bright vermilion and dazzling blue which decorate the walls of the place and are as bright as on the first day of their application? The destructible cement of the pyramids and of ancient aqueducts, the Damascus blade, which can be turned like a corkscrew into a scarab without breaking, the gorgeous unparalleled tints of the same glass that is found amid the dust of old ruins and beams in the windows of ancient cathedrals, and the secret of the true malleable glass. And if chemistry is so little able to rival even the early medieval ages in some arts, why boast of achievements which, according to strong probability, were perfectly known thousands of years ago? The more archaeology and philology advance, the more humiliating to our pride are the discoveries which are daily made. The more glorious testimony do they bear in behalf of those who, perhaps on account of the distance of their remote antiquity, have been until now considered ignorant flounderers in the deepest mire of superstition. Among other arts and sciences, the ancients, as an heirloom from the Atlanteans, had those of astronomy and symbolism, which included the knowledge of the zodiac. As already explained, the whole of antiquity believed, with good reason, that humanity and its races are all intimately connected with the planets, and that these with the zodiacal signs. The whole world's history is recorded in the latter. In the ancient temples of Egypt, this was proved by the Dinara zodiac, but except in an Arabic work, the property of a Sufi, the writer has never met with a correct copy of these marvelous records of the past, as also of the future history of our globe, yet the original records exist most undeniably. As Europeans are unacquainted with the real zodiacs of India, nor do they understand those they have happened to know, witness Bentley, the reader is advised, in order to verify the statement, to turn to work of Denon, in which, if understood, the two famous Egyptian zodiacs can be found and examined. Having seen them personally, the writer has no longer need to trust to what other students who have examined and studied both very carefully have to say of them. As asserted by the Egyptian priests to Herodotus, who was formed that the terrestrial pole and the pole of the ecliptic had formerly coincided. Thus was it found and corroborated by Mackay. For his states that the poles are represented on the zodiacs in both positions, and in that which shows the poles, polar axes, at right angles, there are marks which prove that it was not the last time they were in that position, but the first, after the zodiacs had been traced. Capricorn, he adds, is represented at the North Pole, and Cancer is divided near its middle at the South Pole, which is a confirmation that originally they had their winter when the summer was in Cancer. But the chief characteristics of it being a monument commemorating the first time that the pole had been in the position are the Lion and the Virgin, Leo and Virgo. Broadly calculated, it believed by the Egyptologists that the Great Pyramid was built 3,350 BC, and that Menes and his dynasty existed 750 years before the Fourth Dynasty, had appeared thus 4,100 years BC, is the age assigned to Menes. Now, Sir J. Gardner Wilkinson's declaration that all the facts lead to the conclusion that the Egyptians had already made very great progress in the arts of civilization before the age of Menes, and perhaps before they immigrated into the valley of the Nile, is very suggestive as destroying this hypothesis. It points to great civilization in prehistoric times and is still greater antiquity. The Horus, we'll just say Horus, servants of Horus. There's no way I'm pronouncing that. Were the people who had settled in Egypt. And as M.G. Maspero affirms, it is to the prehistoric race that belongs the honor of having founded the principal cities of Egypt and established the most important sanctuaries. This was before the Great Pyramid epoch and the Great Egypt, and when Egypt had hardly arisen from the waters. Yet they possessed a hieroglyphic form of writing special to the Egyptians, and much has been already considerably advanced in civilization. It was, says Lenormand, the country of the great prehistoric sanctuary, seats of the sacerdotal dominion, which played the most important part of the origin of civilization. What is the date assigned to these people? We hear of 4,000, at the utmost of 5,000 years BC. Now it is claimed that it is by means of the cycle of 25,868 years. That number is a little too close to my connection. Sidereal year, that the approximate year of the erection of the Great Pyramid can be ascertained, assuming that the long, narrow downward passage was directed towards the pole star of the pyramid builders. Astronomers have shown that Alpha Draconis, the then pole star, was in the required position about 3,350 BC, as well as in 2,170 BC. But we are also told that the relative position of Alpha Draconis and Alcyone being an extraordinary one, it could not occur again for a whole sidereal year. This demonstrates that since the Dendra zodiac shows the passage of 3 sidereal years, the Great Pyramid must have been built 78,000 years ago, or in any case that this possibility deserves to be accepted at least as readily as the late date of 3,350 BC. Interesting. Now on the zodiac of a certain temple in the far northern India, as on the Dendriya zodiac, the last characteristic of the signs are found. Those who know well the Hindu symbols and constellations will be able to find out by the description of the Egyptian whether the indications of the chronological time are correct or not. On the Dendra zodiac, as preserved by the modern Egyptian Coptic and Greek adepts, and explained a little differently by Mackay, The lion stands up the hydra, and his tail is almost straight, pointed downward at the angle of 40 or 50 degrees. This position agreeing with the original confrontation of these constellations. But in many places we see the lion, Simha, McKay adds, with his tail turned up over his back and ending with the serpent's head, thereby showing that the lion had been inverted, which indeed must have been the case with the whole zodiac and every other constellation when the pole had been inverted. Speaking of the circular zodiac given as by Denon, he says, there the lion is standing on the serpent and his tail forming a curve downward, from which it is found that through 600,000 or 700,000 years must have passed between the two positions, yet they had made but little difference between in the constellations of Leo and the Hydra, while Virgo is represented very differently in the two. In the circular zodiac, the Virgin is nursing her child, but it seems that they had not had the idea when the pole was first within the plane of the ecliptic. For in this zodiac, as given by Denon, we see three virgins between the lion and the scales, the last of which holds in her hand an ear of wheat. It is much to be lamented that there is in the zodiac a breach of the figure in the latter part of Leo and the beginning of Virgo, which has taken away one decan out of each sign. I'm interested if now there would have been 4 decans in each sign. Nevertheless, the meaning is plain, as the 3 zodiacs belong to 3 different epochs, namely to the last 3 family races of the 4th subrace of the 5th root race, each of which must have lived approximately from 25 to 30,000 years. The first of the first of these, the Aryan Asiatics, witnessed the doom of the last of the populations of the giant Atlanteans, who perished some 850,000 years ago. The Ruta and Dayata island continents toward the close of the Miocene age. The 4th subrace witnessed the destruction of the last remnant of the Atlanteans, the Aero-Atlanteans, in the last island of Atlantis, namely some 11,000 years ago. In order to understand this, the reader is asked to glance at the diagram and the genealogical tree of the 5th root race, generally, though hardly correct, called the Aryan race, and the explanations appended to it. Let the reader remember that which is said of the divisions of root races and the evolution of humanity in the work, and state clearly and concisely in Mr. Sennett's Esoteric Buddhism. There are 7 rounds in every Manvarata. This one is the 4th, and we are in the 5th root race at present. Each root race has 7 sub-races. Each sub-race has in its turn 7 ramifications, which may be called branch or family races. The little tribes, shoots, and offshoots of the last name are countless and depend on karmic action. Examine the genealogical tree here too appended, and you will understand. The illustration is purely diagrammatic and is only intended to assist the reader in obtaining a slight grasp of the subject amidst the confusion which exists between the terms which have been used at different times for the divisions of humanity. It is also here attempted to express in figures, but only with approximate limits for the sake of comparison, the duration of time through which it is possible to definitely distinguish one division from another. It would only lead to hopeless confusion if any attempted were made to give accurate dates to a few. For the races, sub-races, etc., down to their smallest ramifications, overlap and are entangled with each other until it is nearly impossible to separate them. The human race has been compared to a tree and thus serves admirably in this illustration. Hang on, guys. I'm going to see if I can find a better version of it. I hope that I was recording, but I just want to quickly show you the tree that they were talking about. I thought I shared it, and I don't know, but this is the tree. You can always pause to see a little bit more. The main stem of a tree may be compared to the root race. Its larger limbs to the various subraces, 7 in number. On each of these limbs are 7 branches or family races. After this, the cactus plant is a better illustration, for its fleshy leaves are covered with sharp spines, each of which may be compared to a nation or a tribe of human beings. Now, our 5th root race has already been in existence as a race sui generis and quite free from its parent stem about 1 million years. Therefore, it must be inferred that each of the 4 preceding subraces has lived at approximately 210,000 years. Thus, each family race has an average existence of about 30,000 years. Thus, the European family race has still a good many thousand years to run, although the nations or the innumerable spines upon it vary with each succeeding season of 3 or 4,000 years. It is somewhat curious to mark the comparative approximation of duration between the lives of a family race and a sidereal year. The knowledge of the foregoing and the accurately correct division formed part and parcel of the mysteries, where these sciences were taught to the disciples, and were they transmitted by one hierophant to another. Everyone is aware that the European astronomers assign the date of the invention of Egyptian zodiac to the years 2000 or 2400 BC, and insisted that this invention coincides in its date with that of the erection of the Great Pyramid. This, in an Occidental and Eastern astronomer, much appear quite absurd. The year of the Kali Yuga is said to have begun between the 17th and 18th of February in the year 3102 BC. Now, the Hindus claim that in the year 20,400 before Kali Yugam, the origin of their zodiac coincide with the spring equinox, there being at the time of a conjunction of the sun and moon, and Bailey proved by a lengthy and careful computation of that date that even if fictitious, the epoch from which they had started to establish the beginning of their Kali Yuga was very real. That epoch is the year 3102 before our era, he writes. The lunar eclipse arriving just a fortnight after the beginning of the Black Age, it took place in a point situated between the wheat ear of Virgo and the star, it's like a 0 with the line through it, of the same constellation. One of the most esoteric cycles is based upon certain conjunctions and respective positions of Virgo and the Pleiades. Hence, as the Egyptians brought their zodiac from southern India and Lanka, the esoteric meaning was evidently identical. The 3 virgins, or Virgo, in 3 different positions meant with both the record of the first 3 divine or astronomical dynasties who taught the 3rd root race, and after having abandoned the Atlanteans to their doom, returned, or redescended rather, during the 3rd subrace of the 5th, in order to reveal to save humanity the mysteries of their birthplace, the sidereal heavens. The same symbolical record of the human races and the 3 dynasty gods, manes, semi-divine astrals of the 3rd and 4th, and the heroes of the 5th race, which preceded the purely human kings, was found in the distribution of the tiers and passages of the Egyptian labyrinth. As the 3 inversions of the poles, of course, changed the face of the zodiac, a new one had to be constructed each time. In McKay's Sphinxad, the speculations of the bold author must have horrified the Orthodox portion of the population of Norwich, as he says fantastically enough, But after all, the greatest length of time recorded by those monuments, the labyrinth, the pyramids, and the zodiacs, does not exceed 5 millions of years, which is not so, which falls short of the records given as both by the esoteric Chinese and Hindus, which a later nation has registered a knowledge of time for 7 or 8 million of years, which I have seen upon a talisman of porcelain. The Egyptian priests had the zodiacs and the Atlantean Ashura Maya, as the modern Hindus still have, as stated in esoteric Buddhism. The Egyptians, as well as the Greeks and Romans, some 1,000 years ago, were remnants of the Atlanto-Aryans, the former of the older, or the Ruta Atlanteans, the last named, the descendants of the last race of that island, whose sudden disappearance was narrated to Solon by the Egyptian initiates. The human dynasty of the older Egyptians, beginning with Menes, had all the knowledge of the Atlanteans, though there was no more Atlantean blood in their veins. Nevertheless, they had preserved all their archaic records. All this has been shown long ago, and it is just because the Egyptian zodiac is between 75 and 80,000 years old that the zodiac of the Greeks is far later. Volney has correctly pointed out in his Runes of Empires that it is only 16,984 years old, or up to the present date, 17,082. Yeah. Finally, we get to the conclusion of this stanza, and it's a long one, so bear with me. Space forbids us to say anything more, and this part of the secret doctrine has to be closed. The 49 stanzas and the few fragments from the commentaries just given are all that can be published in these volumes. These, with some still older records to which none but the highest initiates have access, and a whole library of comments, glossaries, and explanations from the synopsis of man's genesis. It is from the commentaries that we have hereto quoted and tried to explain the hidden meaning of some of the allegories, thus showing the true views of esoteric antiquity upon genealogy, anthropology, and even ethnology. We will endeavor in the part which follows to establish a still closer metaphysical connection between the earliest races and their creators, the divine men from other worlds, accompanying the statements proffered with the most important demonstrations of the same esoteric astronomy and symbolism. In volume 3 of this work, the said volume of the 4th, in the being almost ready, a brief history of all the great adepts known to the ancients and the moderns in their chronological order will be given, as also a bird's eye view of the mysteries, their birth, growth, decay, and final death in Europe. This could not find room in the present work. Volume 4 will almost entirely devote to the occult teachings. The duration of the periods that separate in space and time the 4th from the 5th, in the historical or even the legendary beginnings of the latter, is too tremendous for us to offer, even to a theosophist, any more detailed accounts of them. During the course of the post-Diluvian ages, marked at certain periodical epochs by the most terrible cataclysms, too many races and nations were born and have disappeared almost without leaving a trace for anyone to offer any description of the slightest value concerning them. Whether the masters of wisdom have a conservative and full history of our race from its incepted stage down to the present times, whether they progress the uninterrupted record of man since he became the complete physical being and become thereby the king of the animals and master on the earth, is not for the writer to say. Most probably they have, and such is our own personal conviction. But if so, this knowledge is only for the highest initiates, who do not take their students into their confidence. The writer can therefore give but what she has herself been taught and no more. But even this will appear to the profane reader rather as a weird, fantastic dream than a possible reality. This is only natural and as it should be, since for years such was the impression made upon the humble writer of these pages herself. Born and bred in European, matter-of-fact, and presumably civilized countries, she assimilated the foregoing with the utmost difficulty. But there are proofs of a certain character which become irrefutable and undeniable in the long run to every earnest and unprejudiced mind. For a series of years, such were offered to her, and now she has the full certitude that our present globe and its human races must have been born, grown, and developed in this and in no other way. But this is the personal view of the writer, and her orthodoxy cannot be expected to have any more weight than any other doxy in the eyes of those whom every flesh theory is heterodox until otherwise proved. Therefore, are we occultists fully prepared for such questions as these? How does one know what the writer has not invented the whole scheme? And supposing she is not, how can one tell that the whole of the foregoing, as given in the stanzas, is not the product of the imagination of the ancients? How could they have preserved the records of such an immense, such an incredible antiquity? The answer that the history of this world since its formation and to the end is written in the stars, is recorded in the zodiac and the universal symbolism, whose keys are in the keeping of the initiates, will hardly satisfy the doubters. The antiquity of the zodiac in Egypt is much doubted, and it's been denied point blank with regard to India. Your conclusions are often excellent, but your premises are always doubtful, the writer was once told by a profane friend. To this the answer came that it was one point at least gained on the scientific syllogisms, however you say that. For with the exception of a few problems from the domain of purely physical science, both the premises and conclusions of the men of science are as hypothetical as they are almost invariably erroneous. And if they do not so appear to the profane, the reason is simply this: the said profane is very little aware, taking as he does his scientific data on faith, that both premises and conclusions are generally the product of the same brains, which, however learned, are not infallible. A truism demonstrated daily by shifting and reshifting of scientific theories and speculations. However, it may be the records of the temple, zodiacal and traditional, as well as ideographic records of the East, as read by the adepts of the sacred science and Vidya, are not a whit more doubtful than the so-called ancient history of the European nations, now edited, corrected, and amplified by half a centuries of archaeological discoveries, and the very problematic readings of the Assyrian tiles, cuneiform fragments, and Egyptian hieroglyphics. So are our data based upon the same readings in addition to an almost inexhaustible number of secret works, of which Europe knows nothing, plus the perfect knowledge by the initiates of the symbolism of every word so recorded. Some of these records belong to an immense antiquity. Every archaeologist and paleontologist is acquainted with the ideograph productions of certain semi-savage tribes, who, from time immemorial, have aimed at rendering their thoughts symbolically. This is the earliest mode of recording events and ideas, and how old this knowledge is in the human race may be inferred from some signs, evidently ideographic, found as hatchets of the Paleolithic period. The Red Indian tribes of America, only a few years after, comparatively speaking, petitioned the President of the United States to grant them possession of 4 small lakes. The petition began written on the tiny surface of a piece of fabric, which is covered with barley, a dozen representations of animals and birds. The American savages have a number of such different kinds of writings, but not one of our scientists is yet familiar or even knows of the early hieroglyphic cipher, still preserved in some fraternities and named in occultism the censar. Moreover, all those who have decided to regard such modes of writing, the ideographs of the Red Indians and even the Chinese characters, and attempts at early races of mankind to express their untutored thoughts, will decidedly object to our statement that writing was invented by the Atlanteans and not at all by the Phoenicians. Indeed, such a claim as that writing was known to mankind many hundreds of millenniums ago, in the face of the philologists who have decreed that writing was unknown in the days of, and to Panini in India, as also to the Greeks in the time of Homer, will be met by general disapprobation, if not that with silent scorn. All denial and ridicule notwithstanding, the occultists will maintain the claim, and simply for this reason. From Bacon down to our modern Royal Society, we have too long period for of the most ludicrous mistakes made by science to warrant our believing in modern scientific assumptions rather than in the denials of our teachers. Writing, our scientists say, was unknown to Panini, and this sage nevertheless composed a grammar which contains 3,996 rules and is the most perfect of all the grammars that were ever made. Panini is made out to have lived barely a few centuries BC by the most liberal, and the rocks in the Iran and Central Asia, where the philologists and historians show us the ancestors of the same Panini. The Brahmins coming into India are covered with writing, 2,000 or 3,000 years old, 12,000 according to some fearless paleontologists. Writing was an ars incognita in the days of Hesiod and Homer, agreeably to Grote, and unknown to the Greeks at so late as 770 BC. And the Phoenicians, who had invented it and knew writing as far back as 15,000 BC, 1500 BC, sorry, at the earliest, were living among the Greeks and elbowing them all the time. All these scientific and contradictory conclusions disappeared, however, into thin air when shalemen discovered the site of ancient Troy, whose actual existence had been long so regarded as fable, and excavated on the site earthenware vessels with inscriptions and characters unknown to the paleontologists and the all-denying Sanskritists. Who will now deny Troy or those archaic inscriptions? As Professor Virchow witnessed, I was myself an eyewitness of 2 such discoveries and helped to gather the articles together. The slanderers have long since been silenced, who were not ashamed to charge the discoverer with an imposture. Nor were truthful women spared any more than the truthful men. Du Chaillu, Gordon Cumming, Madame Moran, Bruce, and a host of others were charged with lying. Madame Moran says the author of Mystical Monsters, who gives this information in the introduction, was accused of deliberate falsehood in reference to her description of a bird-eating spider nearly 200 years ago. But nowadays, reliable observers have confirmed it in regard to South America, India, and elsewhere. A name I cannot pronounce was accused by botanists of having invented the yellow water lily, which he figured in his Birds of the South under the name of Nymphia lutea. I don't know if that's right. And after having lain under the imputation for years, was confirmed at last by the discovery of the long-lost flower in Florida in 1876. And as that same person was called a liar for this, and for his another, I guess, flower. So Victor Hugo was ridiculed for his marvelous word painting of the devil fish and his description of a man becoming its helpless victim. The thing was derided as an impossibility, yet within a few years was discovered on the shores of Newfoundland cuttlefish with arms extending to 30 feet in length and capable of dragging a good-sized boat beneath the surface, and their action has been reproduced for centuries past by Japanese artists. And if Troy was denied and regarded as a myth, the existence of Heracleum and Pompeii declared a fiction. The travels of Marco Polo laugh at and called an absurd fable as one of Baron Munchausen's tales. Why should the writer of Isis Unveiled and the Secret Doctrine be any better treated? Mr. Charles Gould, the author of the above cited volume, quotes in his excellent work a few lines from Macmillan, which are as true as life and too much to the point not to be reproduced. When a naturalist, either by visiting such spots of earth as are still out of the way, or by his good fortune finds very queer plant or animal, he is forthwith accused of inventing his game. As soon as the creature is found to sin against preconception, the great guiding spirit, a priori by name, who furnishes philosophers with their omniscience pro de natura, whispers that no such thing can be, and forthwith there is a charge of hoax. The heavens themselves have been charged with hoaxes. When another French name, and Adams, predicted a planet by calculation, it was gravely asserted in some quarters that the planet which had been calculated was not the planet but another which had clandestinely and improperly got into the neighborhood of the true body. The disposition to suspect hoax is stronger than the disposition to hoax. Who was it that first announced that the classical writings of Greece and Rome were one huge hoax penetrated by the monks in what the announcer would be as little or less inclined than Dr. Maitland to call the Dark Ages? Thus let it be. No disbeliever who takes a secret doctrine for a hoax is forced or even asked to credit our statements. These have already proclaimed to be such by certain very clever American journalists before even the work yet went to press. Nor is it after all necessary that anyone should believe in the occult sciences and the old teachings before one knows anything or even believes in his own soul. No great truth was ever accepted a priori, and generally a century or two passed before it began to glimmer in the human consciousness as a possible variety, except in such cases as the positive discovery of thing claimed as a fact. The truths of today are the falsehoods and errors of yesterday, and vice versa. It is only the 20th century that portions, if not the whole, of the present work will be vindicated. If it is no fact going against our statements, therefore, even if Sir John Evans does affirm that writing was unknown in the Stone Age, for it may have been unknown during the period in the fifth Aryan race, and have been perfectly known to the Atlanteans of the fourth, in the palmy days of their highest civilization. The cycles of the rise and fall of the nations and the races are there to account for it. If told that there have been cases before now of forged pseudographs being palmed off of the credulous, and that our work may be classed with Jekyllot's Bible in India, in which, by the way, there are more truths among its errors than are found in the works of the Orthodox and recognized Orientalists, the charge in comparison with this will dismay us very little. We bide our time. Even the famous Enzor Veda of the last century, considered by Voltaire the most precious gift from the East to the West, and by Max Muller, about the silliest book that can be read, is not altogether without facts and truths in it. The cases when a priori negations of specialists become justified by subsequent collaborations form but an insignificant percentage of those that were fully vindicated by subsequent discoveries and confirmed to the great dismay of the learned objectors. Enzar Veda was a very small bone of the contention compared with the triumph of Sir William Jones, Anquetil de Perron, and others in the matter of Sanskrit and its literature. Such facts are recorded by Professor Max Mueller himself, who, speaking of the discomfiture of Dougal Stewart and Co., in connection with this, states that if the facts about Sanskrit were true, Dougal Stewart was too wise not to see that the conclusions drawn from them were inevitable. Here, therefore, denied the reality of such a language as Sanskrit altogether and wrote his famous essay to prove that Sanskrit had been put together after the model of Greek and Latin by those art forgers and liars, the Brahmins, and that the whole of the Sanskrit literature was an imposition. The writer is quite willing and feels proud to keep company with these Brahmins and other historical liars, in the opinion of our modern Dougal Stewarts. She has lived too long and her experience has been too varied and personal for her not to know at least something of human nature. When you doubt, abstain, says the wise Zoroaster, whose prudent aphorism is found corroborated in every case by daily life and experience. Yet, like St. John the Baptist, the sage of the past ages is found preaching in the desert in company with a more modern philosopher, namely Bacon, who offers the same priceless bit of practical wisdom. In contemplation, he says, in any question of knowledge we add, if a man began with certainties, he shall end in doubts. But if he will be content to begin with doubts, he shall end in certainties. With this piece of advice from the father of English philosophy to the representatives of British skepticism, we ought to close the debate, but our Theosophical readers are entitled to a final piece of occult information. Enough was said to show that evolution in general, events, mankind, and everything else in nature proceeded in cycles. We have spoken of 7 races, 5 of which have nearly completed their earthly career, and have claimed that every race, with its sub-races and innumerable family divisions and tribes, was entirely distinct from its preceding and succeeding races. This will be objected to on the authority of uniform experience in the question of anthropology and anthology. Men have saved in color and type, and perhaps a difference in facial peculiarities, I can't get that word out, cranial capacity, even the same under every climate in every part of the world, says the naturalist. Even in stature. This while maintaining that man descends from the same unknown ancestor as the ape, a claim that is logically impossible without an infinite variation of stature and form from his first evolution into a biped. The very logical person who maintain both propositions are welcome to their paradoxical views. Once more, we address only those who, doubting the general diversion of myths from the contemplation of the visible workings of external nature, think it less hard to believe that these wonderful stories of gods and demigods, of giants and dwarfs, of dragons and monsters of all descriptions are transformations than to believe them to be inventions. It is only such transformations in physical nature, as much as in the memory and conceptions of our present mankind, that this secret doctrine teaches. It confronts the purely speculative hypothesis of modern science based upon the experience and exact observations of barely a few centuries, with the unbroken tradition and records of its sanctuaries, brushing away that tissue of cobweb-like theories spun in the darkness that covers a period of hardly a few millenniums back, in which Europeans call their history. The old science says to us, listen now to my version of the memoirs of humanity. The human races are born one from another, grow, develop, become old, and die. Their sub-races and nations follow the same rule. If your all-denying modern science and so-called philosophy do not contest that the human family is composed of a variety of well-defined types and races, it is only because the fact is undeniable. No one would say that there was no external difference between the Englishman and an African Negro and a Japanese or Chinaman. On the other hand, it is formally denied by most naturalists that mixed human races. The seeds for entirely new races are any longer formed in the days, but this last is maintained only good grounds by the quatrophages of some others. Nevertheless, our general proposition will not be accepted. It will be said that whatever forms man has passed through in the long prehistoric past, there are no more changes for him, save certain variations at present. In the future, hence our sixth and seventh root races are fictions. To this is again answered, how do you know? Your experience is limited to a few thousand years. To less than a day in the whole age of humanity and the present types of the actual continents and isles of our fifth race. How can you tell what will or will not be? Meanwhile, such is the prophecy of the secret books, and there are no uncertain statements. Since the beginning of the Atlantean race, many million years have passed, yet we find the last of the Atlanteans still mixed up with the Aryan element of 11,000 years ago. This shows the enormous overlapping of one race over the race which succeeds it, though in character and external type, the elder loses its characteristics and assumes the new features of the younger race. This is proved in all the formations of mixed races. Now, occult philosophy teaches that even now, under our very eyes, a new race and races are preparing to be formed, and that it is in America that the transformation will take place, and has already silently commenced. Pure Anglo-Saxons hardly 300 years ago, the Americans of the United States have already become a nation apart and owning to a strong admixture of various nationalities and intermarriage, almost a race sui generis, not only mentally but also physically. Every mixed race, when uniform and settled, has been able to play the part of primary race in fresh crossings, says de Quatrefages. Mankind in its present state has thus been formed, certainly for the greatest part, by the successive crossing of a number of races at present undetermined. Thus, the Americans have become in only 3 centuries a primary race, pro tem, before becoming a race apart and strongly separated from all other now existing races. They are, in short, the germs of the 6th subrace, and in some 100 years more will become most decidedly the pioneers of that race, which must succeed to the present European or 5th subrace in all its new characteristics. After this, in about 25,000 years, they will launch into preparations for the 7th subrace, until, in consequence of cataclysms, the first series of those which must one day destroy Europe, and still later the whole Aryan race, and thus affect both Americas, as almost most of the lands directly connected with the confines of our continent and isles, the 6th root race will have appeared on the stage of our round. When shall this be? Who knows, save the great masters of wisdom, perchance, and they are as silent upon the subject as the snow-capped peaks that tower above them. All we know is that it will silently come into existence, so silently indeed that for a long millennium shall its pioneers, the peculiar children who will grow into peculiar men and women, be regarded as anomalous, abnormal oddities physically and mentally. Then, as they increase and their numbers become with every age greater, one day they will awake to find themselves in a majority. It is the present men who will then begin to be regarded as exceptional mongrels, until these die out in their turn in civilized lands, surviving only in small groups on islands. The mountain peaks of today, where they will vegetate, degenerate, and finally die out, perhaps millions of years hence, as the Aztecs have, as the Nayam, and the dwarfish Mula Kurumba of the Nigeri hills are dying. All these are the remnants of one mighty race. The collection of those existence has entirely died out of the remembrance of the modern generations, just as we shall vanish from the memory of the sixth race, humanity. The fifth will overlap the sixth race for many hundreds of millenniums, changing with it slower than its new successor. Still changing in stature, general physique, and mentality, just as the fourth overlapped our Aryan race and the third had overlapped the Atlanteans. This process of preparation for the sixth great race must last without the whole sixth and seven subraces. But the last remnants of the fifth continent will not disappear until some time after the birth of the new race, when another and new dwelling, the sixth continent, will have appeared above the new waters on the face of the globe so as to receive the new stranger. To it also will immigrate and settle all those who shall be fortunate enough to escape the general disaster. When this shall be, as just said, it is not for the writer to know. Only as nature no more proceeds by sudden jumps and starts, then man changes suddenly from a child into a mature man. The final cataclysm will be preceded by many smaller submersions and destructions, both by wave and volcanic fires. The exuberant pulse will beat high in the heart of the race now in the American zone, but there will be no more Americans when the sixth race commences, no more, in fact, than Europeans, for they will have now become a new race and many new nations. Yet the fifth will not die, but survive for a while, overlapping the new race for many hundreds of thousands of years to come. It will become transformed with it, slower than its new successor, still getting entirely altered in mentality, general physique, and stature. Mankind will not grow again into giant bodies, as in the case of the Lemurians and the Atlanteans, because while the evolution of the fourth race led the latter down to the very bottom of materiality in its physical development, the present race is on its ascending arc, and the sixth will rapidly grow out of its bonds of matter and even of flesh. So she even knew we're going to Homo Luminous. Thus, it is mankind of the new world, one by far the senior of the old one. A fact men had also forgotten of Patala, the anthropods of the netherworld, as America is called in India, whose mission and karma it is to sow the seeds for a forthcoming grandeur and for a more glorious race than any of those we know at present. The cycles of matter will be succeeded by cycles of spirituality and a fully developed mind. On the law of parallel history and races, the majority of the future mankind will be composed of glorious adepts. Humanity is the child of cyclic destiny, and not one of its units can escape its unconscious mission or get rid of the burden of its cooperative work with nature. Thus will mankind, race after race, perform its appointed cyclic pilgrimage. Cycles will and have already begun to change each tropical year after the other, dropping one subrace, but only to beget another higher race on the ascending cycle, while a series of other less favored groups, the failures of nature, will, like some individual men, vanish from the human family without even leaving a trace behind. Such is the course of nature under the sway of karmic law, of the ever-present and ever-becoming nature. For in the words of a sage known only to a few occultists, the present is the child of the past, the future the begotten of the present. And yet, O present moment, knowest thou not that thou hast no parent, no canst thou have a child, that thou art ever regretting but thyself, before thou hast even begun to say, I am the progeny of the departed moment, the child of the past, thou hast become that past itself. Before thou utterest the last syllable, behold, thou art no more the present, but verily that future. Thus are the past, the present, and the future the everlasting Trinity in one. the Mahamaya of the absolute is. And we're going to go on to book 2, part 2. Woo! We finished stanza 12. Concluded. Thank you. Sending each and every one of you love, light, compassion, grace, shielding, and protective energy. Please go within, be the shoulder, be the lighthouse, seed your truths, light that path forward. Thank you for hanging in, but book 2, part 2 is going to be amazing. Archaic symbolism of the world religions. Can't wait to read that. Really excited. And that just last part was great. And I hope you got a lot out of it. I hope that all of you have a blessed and beautiful week ahead. Please be the light, shine it bright. Have a blessed and beautiful day wherever you are in the world. And I hope to see you all in the next one. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. And bye for now.